The unicancer trial was a key study demonstrating an important theme of less is more. It looked at a subset of patients with colorectal cancer, a subset that has a cancer spread only to the lining of the abdominal cavity called the peritoneal cavity. And in these patients, it is across the world sometimes done that in addition to performing surgery to remove that cancer spread on the lining, to additionally give chemotherapy into that same abdominal cavity after the removal. And we did not until now have data to show us what the actual outcomes are from the addition of that chemotherapy, and now we do. And as we saw in the trial, unfortunately, the addition of the HIPEC, or the heated intraperitoneal chemotherapy, did not improve the outcomes that we were hoping for. There was no difference, and additionally, unfortunately, there was detriment. There were additional side effects at the 60-day postoperative point, showing us that we now have data to be able to guide patients and families who often ask about this therapy, that unfortunately this does not benefit patients on top of the surgery by itself. And so this is to be commended to the authors for performing a randomized trial to answer an important question that was always a question, because we never before now had a randomized trial. We had small, single-center, non-randomized data sets of this approach being conducted without clear data as to what the relative merits or detriments of the chemotherapy portion was in patients undergoing this surgery. I think technically, while this trial only can give data about the specific chemotherapy drug, in this case oxaliplatin, that was given intraperitoneal, I think there's no clear reason to suggest why another drug may be better. We need research into that, and I think that cytoreductive surgery, as it's called, with anything more than that, should be done in the context of a clinical trial in order to collect data like these to tell us what the merits or detriments are. So a mixed answer to say that the door has been closed on HIPEC, in my opinion, with the exception of any further investigations to look at what might be otherwise beneficial and not detrimental. I would recommend that if this is ever to be done, it should be done in the context of a clinical trial for us to be able to clearly document for this patient, as well as for society and future patients in general, what the outcomes will be. The two pancreas cancer trials we had were also significant, particularly the Conroy et al. Data showing that in the small percentage of patients with pancreas cancer, which is a very difficult disease at any stage, the small percentage of patients, approximately 15 to 20% of diagnosed pancreas cancer patients who can have a surgery because their disease has not spread and it's actually able to be removed. This trial by Conroy and his colleagues looked at whether a FOLFIRINOX 3-drug chemotherapy regimen had better outcomes compared to the standard gemcitabine single-agent chemotherapy drug, which was the standard when this trial was begun. And impressively, and with numbers that we haven't seen in pancreas cancer before, the survival improvement, as well as the progression-free survival as the primary endpoint, but the secondary endpoint, all of them were statistically significantly improved, including overall survival in patients who received FOLFIRINOX after the surgery compared to the previous standard of gemcitabine after the surgery. This came with more toxicity, which is already known because this regimen is used in the advanced pancreas cancer setting, so these are not surprising toxicity data, but do bear mention and the point that this is a better treatment in this situation, but comes with more toxicity. So medical oncologists giving these chemotherapies need to remain vigilant to monitor and treat the toxicities that come along with a more intensive 3-drug regimen. The second trial looked at patients who not only had what we call resectable pancreas cancer, or the ones that are able to be removed, such as we saw in the Conroy trial, but this trial looked at both resectable and what's called borderline resectable, which is an assessment that is done before surgery with the use of high-quality radiographic imaging such as CAT scans in order to determine whether a surgeon would be able to resect it or not. There's three general categories when you're looking at the pancreas cancer. It can either be resectable, which means operable. It can be, on the other end of the spectrum, not resectable because it may be encasing key blood vessels that the body cannot have removed. And then there's this middle ground, what we call borderline, where there's abutment or some proximity to blood vessels that make us clinicians worry that it's probably not going to be able to be removed without leaving disease behind. So this trial included both patients who had resectable disease as well as patients who had borderline resectable disease. And it looked to answer the question as to whether chemoradiotherapy, which is the combination of chemotherapy and radiation before surgery, improves outcomes. And to their credit, they powered the study with the primary endpoint being overall survival, which, as you saw, was not statistically significant in the patients randomized to the intervention of chemotherapy and radiation before the surgery. But it is to be noted that they are still waiting on additional events that they powered the trial for. So it's too soon to tell what the outcomes are in this trial. And also, it was not answering a question of what the merits of chemotherapy by itself without radiation are before a surgery. So it's hard to actually, and you can't compare the two trials that we were just talking about. One took patients who already had the pancreas cancer taken out. It's an inherently better situation. The radiation trial looked at patients both who were resectable as well as people who were on the borderline of resectability. So it's an inherently different trial, and taken together, both of these pancreas cancer studies show that a minority subset of pancreas cancer patients, the around 15 to 20% of pancreas cancer patients who can have their disease removed, are benefited after the surgery with chemotherapy. And the question of preoperative therapy remains most in people with borderline disease, and it's an unanswered question regarding whether chemoradiotherapy is statistically significantly better, and whether chemotherapy itself, which this trial didn't look at, whether chemotherapy might have a benefit without radiation. The three key points are: for colorectal cancer that has a peritoneal spread, we need to only investigate additional non-surgical therapies like HIPEC or other intraperitoneal chemotherapies in the context of a clinical trial in order to prevent patients from getting things that will not help and will hurt. And regarding pancreas cancer, we need to be happy that we have a new standard of care which will improve survival in patients who are in the minority who are able to get a surgery to take out their pancreas cancer, and they should get FOLFIRINOX as long as they are fit enough to receive it and have good monitoring for the toxicities that come with that regimen. And then finally, for the majority of patients that we cannot operate on with pancreas cancer, we need, for patients who are in the intermediate zone of operability, what we call borderline disease, we need more research to tell us what is the right thing to do to try to get to a surgery.